Hello and welcome everybody to this Frequentis webinar about remote towers, brought to you by Frequentis and ATC Networks. So let's talk remote towers now. Remote towers rely on the concept of ATC virtualization. That means providing location-independent ATC services such as virtual centers for ACCs or remote towers in the case of airports. A lot of ANSPs and airports consider this concept in their investment plans, tackling the efficiency issues. While small airfields with little traffic might be good testbeds to verify the early concepts, mid-sized airports pose a real challenge. Demanding requirements for controller situation awareness are mixed with the need for a high-performing and reliable solution. Remote towers is without doubt a new and innovative concept in ATM. And this webinar will guide you through the business case and practical implementation aspects of remote towers. We're going to address the following questions. What are the latest developments around the world? What is the business case and drivers, and why should ANSPs go for a remote tower and why not? And talking about research aspects, political, social and technical issues of remote towers. I'm your host. My name is Markus Klopf, Strategic Marketing Manager here at Frequentis, working for Air Traffic Management and Aviation Solutions. I have a 20 years global experience in the telecommunications and IT sector, managing complex products and solutions for B2B markets. I've been also involved in the Frequentis activities related to CSR and also to NextGen. We invited the following remote tower thought leaders to share their view, and I'm pleased to introduce them to you now. So first of all, it's Jenny Beechener. She's an editor at Jane's Air Traffic Control. Jenny is well known in the ATM world. With her curiosity, she's looking behind the scenes of what's going on in ATM and providing valuable insights and news. Jenny will talk about current applications of remote tower virtual technology, some installed and some other development, and compare motivations behind them. Welcome, Jenny. Then we have Clyde Rinkinen and Marty Lauth from Embry Riddle, Aeronautical University. Embry Riddle educates students at its residential campuses in Daytona Beach in Florida and Prescott, Arizona, and also its 125 worldwide campuses, classrooms and online training programs around the world. Clyde Rinkinen is Associate Professor of Air Traffic Management at Embry Riddle Aeronautical University. He has worked in the field of ATM for 34 years and retired from the FAA after 24 years in operational ATC experience in the TRACON and in the Air Traffic Control Tower. Marty Lauth is Associate Professor in the Air Traffic Management program in the School of Aviation with over 39 years experience in the aviation industry. His experience includes 27 years with the Federal Aviation Administration in progressively responsible operational and management positions. Clyde and Marty will talk about the political, economic and social issues surrounding the remote tower concept in the United States. And then we have Conor Mullan, who is Managing Director at Think Research, a UK-based ATM and airports consultancy. He is a recognized authority on remote towers and digital aerodrome traffic services operations and technology worldwide. Conor will elaborate on the business case of remote towers and come up with some interesting new approaches. Welcome to all my speakers. Before we actually turn into the action with the speakers, I'd like to give you a really important update from DFS in Germany. Because mid-August, over the course of 2 weeks, DFS ran the CSR large-scale demonstration in cooperation with Lufthansa Training, with the remote tower system from Frequentis, comprising advanced cameras and a complete remote tower working position. For the first time in Germany, aircraft were controlled without direct line of sight from the controller, and safety was always ensured. Throughout the whole time, the system was safe and stable, and a large number of flights have been remote controlled without the need of interference through a tower controller in the tower cab. They managed multiple movements concurrently. This project will step-by-step transfer the ATC control tower from airports in Saarbrücken, Erfurt and Dresden, all mid-sized regional airports, to a remote tower center in Leipzig with the objective for long-term cost reduction. This is enabled through new technologies and procedures and will lead to optimized and more efficient resource usage, increasing productivity. We are happy that the project is moving on as planned, which includes the implementation of improved algorithms, new masts with cameras, as well as the installation and deployment of the remote tower center in Leipzig. I would like to congratulate DFS for this huge achievement as part of this CSR large-scale validation, and there will be more news actually about that as soon as it's getting available. Having said that, I would like to hand over to Jenny now, and she's going to provide you with an overview about the existing technologies and existing approaches.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm very pleased to be talking to you from IHS Jones in London. And as Marcus says, I'm going to talk about some of the different applications of remote virtual tower technology and some of the motives behind their development. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the very first certified operational remote tower service, which began in northern Sweden in April last year at Ormsgårdvik. Here we have a picture. This shows the tower-mounted high-definition cameras at the airport, which relay the out-of-the-window view to the remote centre, which is located 150 kilometres away at Sundsvall. This facility has already accumulated over 4,000 hours of operation, and the Swedish service provider, LFV, is in the process of expanding the centre to handle more airports remotely, including Sundsvall and Linköping, and has also announced plans for a second centre to support remote digital operations for 5 further airports, 2 in the south and 3 in the north, controlled from a central facility near Stockholm, Arlanda. When LFE looked at the business case for remote tower services, it found a return on investment once between 10 to 15 airports participate, and it estimates running costs are between 10 and 20% lower than a traditional tower. However, cost is not the only driver for LFE. LFE is interested in ensuring that services are available in some of the more remote parts of Sweden, where the cost of building or maintaining a conventional tower is hard to justify. This is one of the reasons behind Avinor's decision to install remote virtual tower capability, initially focusing on 15 airports in Norway. This service provider launched its €40 million remote tower program in the middle of last year. The sensors are currently being installed at 5 airports to relay data to a remote centre at Bodo, which is due to start test operations early next year. This illustrates how the technology can help local communities, which are heavily dependent on air transport, but where traffic is low. Some remote sites in Norway may only have 1 or 2 movements a day, but have to remain open in case of medical emergencies. Another example, French service provider DSNA has chosen a remote tower solution to ensure service continuity for the islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon off the coast of Newfoundland, and home to a community of less than 6,000 inhabitants. The Miquelon tower is equipped with high-definition, day-night visible thermal cameras, relaying data in real time to a control suite at the larger facility on the adjacent island of Saint-Pierre. Miquelon faces extreme weather challenges, which include horizontal snow and 70-knot winds. Initial operations here are due to start later this year. Meanwhile, in Canada, Nav Canada has started a proof-of-concept trial at Fredericton Airport. This is a small facility located about 300 kilometres from Halifax. Again, high-definition cameras are used to relay video surveillance to controllers in Halifax, where the aim is to enhance the information available. And Canada has a large number of remote airports, many with restricted air traffic services. So here are some examples of challenging environments. On the right, that's a picture of the helipad on a very exposed coastline in Norway. This was used for the Cesar trials in 2013. On the left, extreme weather conditions and a mixed traffic profile at Zeltweg Air Base in Austria, where both helicopter traffic and fast jets were successfully tracked during tests. Remote towers also have a role to play at larger facilities, and we've already heard from Marcus that Germany has started tests at 3 medium-sized airports at Saarbrücken, Dresden and Erfurt, from where the data is relayed to a remote virtual centre at Leipzig. Saarbrücken handles about 30,000 movements a year, and DFS is looking for cost savings by using a central resource. At the tower centre, each tower controller is expected to provide single tower services for one airport at a time. However, controllers can be cross-trained for more than one airport, contributing to more efficient use of resources. Now, upgrading. This is a very different application. Leesburg Executive Airport in Virginia is interesting for several reasons. It's the first remote tower demonstration at a US commercial airport, and it's led by the local Virginia Department of Aviation with participation from the FAA and the Controllers Association, NATCA. Leesburg currently doesn't provide air traffic control services, yet it handles more than 100,000 aircraft movements each year, and it's located less than 20 miles from the busy Washington Dulles International Airport. So Virginia's working very closely with the FAA and hopes to certify remote operations in order to introduce air traffic control services. There are in the US more than 5,000 non-towered airports, so this project is attracting a lot of interest, and there are some similar initiatives being launched elsewhere, and Colorado being one. Let's look at longer term. The Cesar joint undertaking is sponsoring several projects which take the concept of a single airport remote tower and apply it to multiple airports. I'd like to mention a couple of examples. Looking at small aerodromes, the Irish Aviation Authority has just completed a trial which relayed data from Cork and Shannon airports to a single control room in Dublin. Ireland's service provider is looking to reduce costs and says the traffic volume at some of its smaller airports may not be sufficient to cover the cost of service provision at a user charge that's sustainable from the customer's perspective. There were some operational trials carried out over 3 months during the summer to validate the technology, starting by emulating nighttime operations before progressively increasing the level of traffic to see how much could be safely handled. And the Irish Aviation Authority is looking at the possibility of one controller simultaneously providing air traffic control services for more than one low-volume aerodrome, subject to completion of safety assessments and regulatory approval. Cost control is not the only motive. The service provider is also interested in safety benefits arising from the enhanced visual data, for example, integrated track and label information and the ability to digitally enhance images in low visibility. So moving on to larger airports, Italy's service provider ENAV is testing the concept of multiple airport operations at Milan, Linate and Malpensa airports. Starting 2 years ago, ENAV used real-time simulations to assess the technical and operational feasibility of a remote platform. ENAV has since progressed to shadow mode operations at quiet times of the day and night. There's a testbed working position located at Malpensa, and that enables the controllers to provide the remote services to Linate and a restricted area at Malpensa. ENAV is looking at ways in which one controller can manage 2 airports simultaneously and believes this would enable services at some Italian airports to continue that would otherwise have to close due to financial constraints. The testbed in Germany is also being used for Cesar research into multiple tower operations. There's a separate large-scale demonstration project at Hungary's gateway airport, Budapest. Here, the airport's 2 existing runways extend over 6 kilometres distance from one end to the other, and they're served by a tower that's overdue modernisation. There are high-definition cameras installed across the airfield which relay information to a remote control suite nearby, where the data is integrated with the surface movement guidance and display systems. And controllers from here have the ability to zoom in on airfield hotspots not visible from the existing tower. And Hungary Control plans to start contingency tower services within 2 years. There's a project in the Netherlands where, again, we're looking at remoting to a facility, this time at Schiphol, located at Schiphol Airport, for remote towers for more than a single airport. So, to conclude where we are in terms of the current applications, the concept of single remote tower operations is proven and operational, and that's been the case since April last year. We see it now being adopted in different locations for different reasons, and there is no one size fits all. For example, it can provide round-the-clock access to isolated communities. It can deliver service continuity in hostile environments. It can provide access to more resources, like such as controllers and support staff. But also, interestingly, is the addition of safety nets as a result of the enhanced visual tools that we're just beginning to see coming through in some of the test and demonstration projects. Nevertheless, the economic benefits remain limited until a remote centre can provide services for more than one airport, and the concept of multiple airports is still in very early stages of development. There are some SESAR tests underway, but the concept still has to be validated and approved and certified in accordance with ATC regulations. The Swedish example intentionally used existing rules and regulations. Multiple towers present some new challenges in this area. Thank you very much for listening. Marcus, I now hand back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. That was a really great lineup on the current state of the art, what's going on in the field of remote towers. I would like to now hand over to my next speaker, Marty and Clyde, who will talk about the research aspects of remote towers.
Thank you very much, Marcus. All right, my cohort, Clyde, Rinkinen, and myself, Marty Lauth, we're currently in Daytona Beach, Florida, enjoying some sunshine today. We'll be talking about some of the remote virtual towers, some of the research aspects, and our perspective is going to be maybe a little more from the U.S. side of things, but I will let Clyde go ahead and get started with that.
Well, thank you, Marcus. I appreciate the opportunity for my colleague Marty Lauth and myself to be part of this presentation. We're joining you from the Embry Riddle Aeronautical University Daytona Beach campus, located in Florida. Jenny, great points, excellent summary on remote tower technology. Why is Embry Riddle involved in remote tower technology? We think that partnerships across government, industry, and academia can help to transform the remote tower concept, and that we can provide maybe unbiased research for scholarly activity, looking at the details of what's occurring within the remote tower concept. We find that the different states or countries have different concepts and agreements for embracing the new technology of remote tower. But we do find that there's an opportunity for improved levels of ATC service, whether it's at a towered or non-towered airport or for contingencies, and also to improve safety at airports when we leverage new technologies, for instance, the infrared or for UAS detection, which is really becoming a situation at the towered airports across the world. We also think that we can leverage some of these technologies for remote tower to increase safety and maybe the airspace efficiency, even at the smaller and moderate towers, but also at larger airports that can improve the ATC performance and maybe the performance of the actual airport itself. So using both communication, navigation, and surveillance concept that we've used for years, we can see some great improvements. And Jenny talked about some of it in terms of the physical structure, that's obvious, some of the reduction in cost, but also for a contingency situation. So I think generally we, government, industry, and academia, we probably need to embrace these new technologies. And although global agreement for how each air navigation service provider uses remote tower technology, it may be different, but really it should be our goal to try to get together and find out how it works best for each individual country. But the #1 priority is going to be safety. So looking at the different regulations from a political aspect, as our slide indicates, the modernization of ATM is important, but ICAO does call for a continuous watch or visual observation of airports, and we do that through the remote technology. Now, Europe tends to be the leader, I think, in remote technology, and they've had great EASA guidance, great involvement of the unions in their development throughout Europe. But I think, you know, Europe's going to continue to research these activities and look at how they can adjust existing regulations as they move along. In the U.S., we're a little bit slower at embracing the new technology. Part of it might be the social aspect of aspects of the union involvement, but in both cases, both in the United States and in Europe, there's been great success at having the union involvement or the workforce involvement in the technology. So I think one of the things too we want to indicate is that we as a university, we want to look at research in the human factors, the training, and also that probably from the social side, union participation is really important. They need to be involved in every aspect of the introduction of remote technology. They are equal partners for consultation and development, but I think, again, working as a team, the ANSPs, the workforce, industry, academia, together we can work together at resolving some of the problems. But from, I put these, the political and the social together on the same slide for the reason that we are working together. And the technology definitely will change the way air traffic control works or traffic. Just the concept of working multiple airports is different for many air traffic controllers, but also it makes sense for a contingency situation rather than building a whole new tower. Let's look at the next slide. The economic considerations. We have to be very, very careful when we look at cost benefits. And ICAO did a short study looking at where the main cost benefits were. And the comparisons a lot of times factor in a reduction in the number of ATCOs. And really, I think the solution will be to centralize ATCOs, maybe allowing remote technology to be used at slower, non-traditionally towered airports in the United States, or maybe increasing the tower operations, the hours of operations, that is, through the centralized ATCOs, but not reducing the amount of controllers that are currently working traffic. Although that might happen many years down the road, it's definitely not going to happen immediately. There's also a great need for seasonal fluctuations in sporting events. So the cost benefit, excuse me, the cost benefit can be affected there. So when we look at cost effectiveness, if we look at contingency situations, building a new tower, using old towers, it really makes a lot of sense. It can also be used in a contingency situation where there may be some type of event that destroys the tower, maybe an earthquake or some type of event, and you have to quickly have a remote tower operations set up. And so we have good contingency planning for remote tower use. But again, as Jenny brought out, building a tower, the cost of just the tower structure alone, equipage, maintaining it over the years, that's a good cost-benefit analysis there for the reason to use remote tower technology. And again, the centralized ATCOs and also the staff functions that support the ATCOs, it makes sense when we're looking at involving these lower density airports. In the United States, a lot of times we don't have towered airports at low density airports. They don't meet the criteria and they're non-towered airports. But it would be a way to bring in more controllers to work those individual airports and have that ATC function at the low density or small airports, or to increase the operational hours at medium or larger airports to get that great visual view. And I think the technology does complement large air traffic control towers in terms of the maybe the infrared or UAS detection that I spoke about earlier. We also need to consider the support to some of the underprivileged states, maybe that want to increase their towered or ATCO airports with ATCOs. It is a benefit, and we need to consider that in the long range across the world. But for smaller airports in the United States, also in other countries. So the FAA indicates that the impact to aviation in 2012 accounted for 5.4% of the U.S. GDP, and it supported 11.8 million jobs. And I think that the cost-benefit analysis is really helped just with aviation being brought to these smaller rural communities. We also want to look at research opportunities available with academia, and I think Marty will discuss that in terms of human factors, training regulations, and qualifications. So Marty, why don't you take over?
Okay, thanks, Clyde. Very thorough there, covering the most of that information. And just from Embry Riddle's perspective, we've been looking at this technology along with a couple of companies, including Frequentis, for about the last year or so. We've been looking at the feasibility here in the United States, which, as most of you probably understand, that it's completely different from Europe's standpoint. Well, not completely, but certainly has a different feel from Europe. So we're looking at possibly expanding the research. And what we would like to bring into is we'd also like to continue dealing with areas of like possibly spatial orientation, altitude and distance. We work with the Department of Air Traffic Controllers here at Embry Riddle. So we're working with our fellow faculty and scientists to come up with some human factors issues that might deal with working airplanes from a monitor perspective. So we're looking at enhancing that or expanding that. As Clyde mentioned, we're looking at also not only increasing operations at possibly airports with no towers, but also enhancing the ATC system at air traffic control towers. And at least for the near future, this is the area that I think the FAA also might be interested in, that how can we, even though we have towers, can we use this equipment and procedures and technology to enhance what we already have there? And as was mentioned before, safety obviously being the #1 thing. And then certainly all of us are getting to the point where UAS are a major factor, and certainly we here in the United States have had to deal with issues in and around airports. So some of this technology we're also looking at using to maybe enhance that aspect also. But so the main purpose here at Embry Riddle is that we're looking at just expanding the research that's already been done, and there's been a lot of research, obviously in Europe, as was mentioned with Clyde and so forth, and Jennifer. So we're just looking at taking that one step farther. Up till this point, at least from what we tell, and certainly the operation that Census has in Leesburg, they're dealing with generally low to medium level facilities as far as number of traffic is concerned, although they are expanding, like was mentioned, in Italy and Budapest and all that. But here, obviously, in the United States, we have quite a few airports that are not towered, but we still run fairly high operations, somewhere anywhere from, could be 100,000 to 150,000 operations a year. So we wanted to make sure that the equipment and the technology can handle those kind of situations. We have dealt with the FAA. We've been working with the FAA. Let me go ahead and continue with the next. We've been dealing with the FAA as far as who've been interested in the validation and certification of these various systems. So that's the area that we're looking at trying to do, and obviously there's going to possibly be different levels of certification based on the level of traffic. As Jennifer once has mentioned, that no one size fits all. So you might have a system that will work at a low-level facility, maybe those in northern Sweden and Norway, but that same system may not be suitable for something where you're running considerably more traffic or in a different environment. Maybe, like I said, here in sunny Florida, where sun and glare might be an issue. So here again, that's one of the things that we're looking at, is possibly looking at different levels of certification and validation of systems. We've looked at different airports here in the Florida area, and we run into some certain challenges, as Clyde already mentioned, with the FAA and certainly the Air Traffic Controllers Union. So we're trying to work with them as far as trying to see if we can move forward on this.
Marty?
Yes.
We did have a question over on the panel in terms of what was the union's in IFATCA's attitude towards remote tower. If you want, you can take it in two parts, remote and also multiple facility. I think just commenting real quickly on the union's participation, at least NATCA. NATCA's cautious, I would say, on this situation, and as I indicated in the discussion earlier, they need to be a full participant, and I think, Marty, you had quite a bit of discussion that maybe you could address those two items. I'm not sure if you've had discussion with IFATCA, though.
No, I have not. I have talked with some folks from NATCA, which is the Air Traffic Controllers Union here in the United States. And as of right now, they would prefer keeping to airports that are non-towered. So they want to do any kind of testing or research based on airports that are non-towered. And as Jennifer said, we have over 5,000 here in the United States. And as Clyde mentioned, we do have a standard where in many cases they don't qualify for any kind of air traffic control system if it's below a certain amount or if there's no commercial traffic and so forth. But that's where the union currently is interested in doing. Now, hopefully it may change over the course of the next year or two based on as this technology improves and matures. They might find that using it in many cases, even at airports that already have towers, that it could be of great benefit to the air traffic controllers and to safety in general. So that's where we've gotten to this point. I'm just going to hit the last slide. Basically, what we're looking at trying to do, and which is already done to some degree, but we're certainly interested in doing it here at Embry Riddle, is doing continually more progressive testing using more complex and busier aircraft or airports. So using multiple runways, different from different directions, can the controllers, you know, see it from different spots? Maybe there might be a point where we look at airports where a video system or could be set up in a location that would help the controller spot airplanes better than where the control tower is located, because it's not necessarily always in the ideal spot. So here again, these are other things that we're looking at. And we have here at Embry Riddle, we've got the experts to deal with a lot of these things, as it mentions here, both air traffic, safety, meteorology, and that brings up another area, and the fact that we've been looking at here at Riddle as far as possibly using this technology not only for air traffic, but for those not familiar with some of our acronyms, Department of Homeland Security and our Emergency Department and Department of Defense. So these are all areas that we see that this technology could lead to not only both safety and air traffic, but certainly for security reasons. I don't know if you have anything else to add besides that, Clyde. But...
No, I think you covered everything well, and I would send it back to Marcus.
Okay, Marcus, it's all yours.
So that's a good. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Clyde. Thanks, Marty. I mean, you really made a point here also that this is not just only for the remote tower applications for air traffic management, but also moving into other things. So we really have an innovation here that could change the way security is done on airports. I would like to hand over now to Conor Mullan, who is my next speaker. I think he has a couple of interesting points to make about that as well. So Conor, the mic is yours, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Marcus.
Yeah.
So, hi everybody. My name is Conor Mullan, and I work at Think Research. We're independent consultants, and we've been working on remote towers now for, I'd say, 6 or 7 years. Began in, like lots of people, in Northern Europe with LFE, and have since worked on other projects both within Europe and worldwide. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the business case for remote towers. So first of all, we need to distinguish really. Remote towers is one of those concepts that appears to come out of nowhere. And so some people call it a disruptive technology, some people not so much. But what that does, and especially when it's something like remote towers, which is very visual, very tangible, it creates a very firm impression in people's minds about what exactly the concept is. And today I want to go a little bit beyond it. So first I'll talk about what we see today as the perception of remote towers from a business case point of view. Up until now, really, most of the business arguments have stemmed from cost or cost efficiency as a primary driver. In a lot of the work we have done through validation, the business case is almost taken as an assumption, and the work focuses on making sure that actually it can be operated. The belief is that if we can prove that it works and it can be operated, then the business case is almost a no-brainer. And most of that focuses on systems which we know and recognize and which we are all familiar with, which are the, if you like, traditional remote towers, which replicate today's tower operations, reproduce that visual link using cameras and screens. And there's a lot of reasons we've done that. There's change management issues, there's regulatory issues, and so on. But what that does is it focuses people's minds very much on a particular solution. And in terms of the business case, that does have some impact. If we look at the primary driver, the cost, under single remote tower operations, and by that I mean one remote tower module to one aerodrome, a return on investment can actually take many years to come to fruition, or alternatively it requires a very high volume rollout. This is because the benefits themselves, purely from one-to-one remote tower module to aerodrome operations, are quite small. You're working a lot with primarily operating costs and working in the margins, so you need a very high rollout in order for that to be, the return on investment to be achieved. That's why we see people like LFV building a remote tower centre and going from 1 to 2 to 3 and more aerodromes. We see people like Aeronautical rolling out 12 and 15. Because really for a remote tower centre, if that's what we're doing with these tower farms, that's the sort of, that tends to be the size of operations that we need to see a real return on investment. And also, when we're looking at one-to-one, especially with what people might call today's technology, but actually it's technology that was first demonstrated quite a few years ago, the applicability of that solution limits the operation scenarios, limits the size of the benefit. It focuses our mind again on those small remote aerodromes, low complexity, low traffic, and so on. However, despite those limitations, there are still things to be gained, either for greater benefit or for non-financial benefits. The single remote tower, a single aerodrome, we have a cost saving through things like recruitment, training, managing resource, and also here we have instances where, in actual fact, if it's purely operating budget, costs may not be lower, but the service becomes more sustainable. We then get on to multiple aerodromes, and I accept what has been said before about the status of multiple remote tower and the relative immaturity of it, but certainly as far as today's concept exists, that's where most people see the larger return on investment, because we get the rostering benefits, potential to have one controller to more than one aerodrome, and also an increased reduction in infrastructure as well. We also see policy benefits, where again it's maybe non-financial. Certain countries have a requirement from governments to provide regular public transport, and this, although it no longer provides a cost benefit, may at least make it somehow affordable. It ensures availability of cost-effective airport ATS in the regions. Again, sticking with today's model or today's notion of remote towers, we have what might be called bunker towers. So these come in two flavors, I guess. There's contingency remote tower. Again, that's very well described in today's operational concept. This one is, it can be difficult to build a business case around, because you look for a return on investment or you look for operating cost reductions. And really the notion of contingency remote tower is that you would hope never to have to use it. It's something you would use in the event that your normal tower became inoperational, yet you wanted air traffic services to be maintained at an aerodrome. So really here you're looking at a revenue resilience model. And more commonly is replacement towers, a low-cost solution to building a new tower, potentially if you're building a new runway, or you're relocating to secure remote locations with better access and better views. We do get into a slightly philosophical argument here, whereby contingency towers, if they can provide 100% of capacity of the regular tower, then would you need the regular tower at all? And does the contingency ATS by default become the replacement tower? And that further blurs the lines a little bit for the business case between the two. And looking again at the policy here, what this can do is enable competition for ATS, not just in the environments that we know at today, but more so at the more complex aerodromes. I mean, none of this is new. This is all information which is very well known, and it is focused on what people know today to be the remote tower concept. What we really have to do, though, if we're trying to build a very strong business case around remote tower, is extend our understanding of the concept, maybe even forgetting about remote towers as a concept and thinking more about digital aerodrome traffic services. If we think about the enablers of remote tower, how they can be expanded, work outside today's understanding of the concept, which at the time when it was written was considered to be the, if you like, the parent in the tree, we probably should start to think of that as more of a child in a wider concept tree. And this is stuff that is still very much under development. but really it is, some people have called it digital ATS, digital aerodrome control, remote tower 2.0. But this is where we, as an industry, are expecting to see further benefits unlocked, both in terms of size and of scope. We might look to technologies such as virtual and synthetic visual reproduction. We might look at integration of air traffic services with airport operational plans, network of operational plans, and so on. And also then we get into removing virtual towers as virtual centers and cross-border air traffic services. Rather than focusing this on a cost thing for low complexity, low density, low traffic aerodromes, we start to see things like increased safety. I know certainly in the States, as our colleagues from Embry Riddle have just said, when we look at non-towered airports or even the staff next to towers, safety there is a driver, maybe more so than cost. We have increased flexibility and access, and also through technologies, because of the fact that things are digitized, we can in fact have greater operational resilience, whether that's in low visibility operations or better views, less restrictions, and so on. So the business case right now is a bit like the concept and a bit like the benefits. It is, I guess it's there, but has a limit. Whereas if we unlock the concept, we actually unlock the business case as well. What we then have, because the business case is about more than costs and benefits, we have to look also at the business models. And this, anything that creates a new business model actually can be considered more of a true representation of a disruptive technology. And both remote tower and digital aerodrome traffic services have the potential to create new models, both for service providers and airports. And this is where, from a business case, it can start to get a bit more interesting because we have new business models. For the service provider, we now have the ability to consolidate and centralize services where those savings are indeed passed on to the airport, and particularly whether you already have a competitive airport air traffic service market or whether you're trying to break into one, being able to be much more cost efficient is something that the airport will certainly favour. The ability to provide services in new markets, that's in itself a contestable market. Any market that is contestable by its very nature will create new competition, and it will create new competitors as well. For the airport then, we have, again, depending on the market within the country or the region, the ability to outsource ATC without reliance on new providers taking the old tower building is attractive, both in terms of transition and continued operations. Currently, the model, if you change your service provider at an airport, is you may get the same staff coming into work the next day in the same building, and it becomes quite a sharp transition. So here, if we no longer have a reliance on the old tower building, we can actually ease that transition, reduce the reliance on the old tower building, whether that's to eliminate it or upgrade it. We might then see a future where airports handpick different services to suit their market and budget. So maybe they have full ATC during the day, AFIS at night, and you can also then have airport groups buying shared ATS services. So rather than have individual costs, individual centers, individual services, you can get a reduction for buying in groups. And also, as well as the service providers and the airports, there's also a business model that it will emerge for suppliers, and this is something that we have seen in the last few months. So already the suppliers, their business model is either we can supply a whole ATC tower system, or actually we can supply, for example, just a visual subsystem through standardized interfaces. Eurokai has released recently the first set of their standards, which focuses on the visual. You have the possibility of supplier-owned and maintained centralized infrastructure. So much in the way as today we lease aircraft, we could have leased remote tower centers, leased to the service providers, but owned and maintained by the manufacturers. And as I say, what we've seen emerge recently is the ability to form strategic alliances where, if you like, some of the more traditional service providers can team with equipment suppliers, both to supply equipment and operate that equipment in the new markets. So again, new business models emerging. If I should conclude quickly, as with every business case, the secret is to optimize the solution to what is needed locally. We prefer not to look at remote tower as that rather limited concept of single, multiple, or contingency. We prefer to look at the wider concept, digital services. The key is to work out for that airport what exactly is their requirement for ATS, what are their drivers, and what are their most effective means of providing that service. That high-level concept actually has a much more flexible application where you can you have much more of an option to pick and choose and focus on various options. But what is common is that the remote tower technology and the digital ATS is changing what an airport can afford in terms of air traffic services. The business case for that investment is still evolving. It is not just that cost low density model that we all recognize today. It is evolving, it will continue to evolve, and it will be driven by the technology, by the concepts, and by the regulators themselves, and what people see as being acceptable and what the market is. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Marcus.
Thanks, Conor. What an exciting concept you're presenting here. Leased towers, digital ATS. So this is really heading into something completely new, which hasn't been seen before in the world of ATM. So really exciting. Thanks, Conor. So we are now actually at the end of the presentation. We are now jumping into the questions. Thanks for those who already sent in questions. Just to repeat, you can post questions online. We're going to see them here, and we're going to try to answer some of them. We have a couple of more minutes, and we stay online not until 3 o'clock, but a little bit longer. So I'm happy if you can join us a little bit longer. The first question I would like to direct to Jenny. We got two questions about. We got a question actually about civilian ATC. That was all about civilian ATC, but what is the government military, since the government military budgets are reduced, what's the military interest on the concept of remote towers? Jenny, can you answer that?
Thank you, Marcus. Yes, that's a very relevant question. We've heard a lot about the civilian applications. Yeah, the answer to the question, yes, certainly there is interest. There's the example that I put up at Zwartweg Air Base, for example. That test was carried out more than a couple of years ago. So the military has been looking at this for a considerable period of time. Cost, I think the questioner asked, is cost the driver here? I would, in my experience, I've found not necessarily so. The interest, of course, is the safety of military personnel, and in theatre and in certain environments, the idea of remoting those essential services becomes very attractive for a safety reason. And I know there's interest in enabling the continuity of air traffic services without putting staff at risk in a war zone, for example. Now, the other concept is a mobile unit that can offer services. I'm not aware that that's been explored in any detail. In fact, I'm not aware of a military application that is as advanced as the civilian ones we've spoken about, but there is clearly interest there. Okay,
Jenny, did you want to say something more?
No. I mean, if anyone else is aware, then I'd be very interested in hearing if there are more advanced projects underway, apart from discussions and tentative talks about testing the technology by military interests.
Well, I think I've seen some signs. So we have seen some signs from military that are interesting, and especially the aspect of people protection is certainly something which is an additional value of remote towers in the military aspect.
This is Clyde. I'd like to make sure we think about the fact for rapid deployment of different towers into areas maybe that are not safe or have been damaged, And so I think there's an area there to explore for the rapid deployment.
Okay, so next question. There is a question about the ADCO rating. We got a couple of questions actually on that. So what do you think, and I'm directing this to the panel now, what do you think in terms of ADCO rating? Will they need to get some special rating for remote towers, or is their current rating enough, or what is the development that you see here?
Marcus, this is Marty.
Go ahead.
I don't necessarily see a different rating, and this is talking from an air traffic control perspective. I do see that you would have to be trained, obviously, on the equipment and the technology that you'd be using in a tower. So it would probably be incorporated right with whatever training you would have. Now, they might have an addendum onto some kind of a certification that said you've been trained in remote tower technology, but I'm not sure if that would necessarily be a totally separate thing. This is just my opinion. Because like I said, from an air traffic control perspective, usually we're taught to look out windows and different procedures. This time we'd be looking at panels, so it'd be a very similar, just but different technology. So that would be my opinion about that.
Okay. Anybody else having an opinion on that?
This is Clyde. I'll just discuss one little thing here that, the way it's licensed in Europe is a little bit different. Your ADCO licensing, or the right to be a controller, you do get a specific license. We don't really have that system in the United States. We get ratings, but it's not considered a license. And so it's a little bit different from country to country.
All right. So to move ahead with the
I
questions.
can just have one more thing, Marcus.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Conor. Conor, go ahead.
Sorry. Yes. So actually, just to give a bit of perspective on the European market, it's something, in fact, that EASA are looking at requirements on licensing regarding remote tower operations, whereas EuroCAI looked at standards looking at visual representation. EASA themselves have looked, in fact, at the requirements on licensing, and they had a EuroCAI decision and explanatory note published towards the end of last year, which is available on their website.
Can I add an additional comment, Marcus? That an area for discussion currently is the ratings, the license for controllers for specific airports, aerodromes, and this is where current regulations are centered around a controller operating a specific aerodrome, and there's a lot of discussion surrounding how does that current regulation support an environment where a controller has that capability or with more than one aerodrome, and that will surely influence the requirements for the ratings and the license of individual ATCOs.
Absolutely. All right. Since time is moving on, I would like to have one operational question and another technical question. So there's one operational question which is really interesting. I think that's Jenny, that might be for you as well. So how many of the current planned evaluations are in environments where inbound, outbound VFR aircraft are not sequenced or separated? For instance, outside of Class B, C airspace.
Thank you, Marcus. That's a technical question, and I'm not qualified to answer it in detail. But I am familiar with the. It strikes me that we're looking here for providing safety at some of the more complex aerodromes where you've got a mixture of traffic, and I know that's the motive behind the Colorado project that the Colorado Department of Transport is looking at. I mean, Marty touched on this, so he may have more information on this. But at Fort Collins, Loveland, I know there's a mixture of general aviation and some scheduled traffic. And for the U.S. environment, some of those users are not I'm not necessarily listening in on the radio waves, so that there's a complex mixture of traffic, and that does put some challenges to the provision of control services where your users aren't necessarily in that environment. I don't know, Marty, you might have more information on that.
I don't have any specific information, but Marcus, could you just repeat the first part of that question? You were coming broken up to me as far as...
Okay, so it was about environments with inbound and outbound VFR aircraft which are not sequenced or separated.
Okay, and that was one of the issues that we here at Riddle were going to look at or research in more depth when you have aircraft that are heading towards the airport, those that are leaving the airport, and maybe even some that are in the pattern working, with the controller using this equipment, be able to, differentiate, especially in very close proximity to each other. Because here, certainly in the United States and possibly in some countries in Europe, technically between VFR aircraft, there is no separation standard other than they have to not hit each other. So would a controller using this technology be able to differentiate a spatial orientation of is one closer to the other, and especially if they don't have any kind of like radar system to help them with that? And then what Jennifer was mentioning, that if you start throwing in higher performance aircraft, jets or commercial aircraft, then that complexity goes up even higher. So that's just a much higher complex situation that you would have to look at. So I don't know if that... I agree, it does. It's definitely something...
I think that's a good...
Here I was just going to say, here in the States, it's just, we have many airports where there is definitely a mix of traffic, where you've got, like I said, commercial jets landing with small, VFR aircraft. Now, technically, if they're coming in within, say, Class D or C airspace, or at least what we call it here, they would have to be talking to the controller. So theoretically, they should not be coming in and out of the airport, at least without talking to the controller. Hopefully, he can use then the technology to separate them. So I don't know if Clyde has anything else to add with that, but.
No, right at the end, you did touch on that Charlie Delta airspace, the fact that it's required in the United States. In Charlie, it's actually sequenced in by the radar controller. In Class Delta, the tower controller does the sequencing generally, although there are exceptions to that. And then we have the non-towered airports. And those airspaces, when I describe them as Charlie Delta, are different in Europe than what they are in the United States. So it adds to the complexity of what we're discussing here. But also we have the non-towered airports, and the fact that in the United States, the mix of traffic, probably 25% are VFR aircraft, 25% of the traffic, and that's quite a large number as compared to other areas of the world. But we do have, with remote tower technology, the enhanced tools for maybe for the controllers to use to sequence the aircraft. So that's a great question, though.
So this has all been quite interesting questions. There are more questions coming in now, as I see. Unfortunately, we're really running out of time at the moment, and I would like to conclude this webinar. I would like to thank all my speakers, all my experts here in the panel, sharing their views. I think we heard some great stories, great overview, great insights, and some interesting things. And I would like to thank you in the audience for joining this webinar and for listening in. We are working on another webinar at the end of the year, which will probably include more on the topic of remote towers. Thank you and have a nice day.